I'm going to share my screen. And okay. Yes, it's telling me I'm sharing, which I don't really care about. Okay. So I'm picking up a little bit before where we left off last time, because I really want to focus on this a little bit. This is after the golden calf, and God has attempted to, God has said that God is fed up with this people. He refers to this people as Moses's people, and seems to be disavowing them, offers Moses the opportunity to become the new Abraham, as it were, to have his own people. Well, God wipes out this people, and Moses went up. He talked to God. He makes a series of arguments and convinces God to relent. People will be punished, but God won't wipe them out. And then Moses, in the midst of that, really in the wake of that, makes another plea. There's something in the Jewish tradition called an eight ratzon. An eight ratzon is a moment where God is accessible, willing, open to pleas and possibilities. Uh, there's a sense, there are specific moments, not just in Jewish history, not just here in Moses' life, but even to this day, we're told that, for example, Yom Kippur is an eight ratzon. Yom Kippur, God is particularly open. If we will return in repentance, we have an assurance that God will forgive us. So it's an eight ratzon. We're told that a person on their wedding day, prayers made on a person's wedding day under the chuppah are God is particularly receptive as they're beginning a new life. And so this seems to be an eight ratzon. Um, and because Moses has successfully defended the people to God and gotten him to relent. And so here God is going to push further. Um, and he goes on to quote God, see, you said to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me who you will send with me. Right. So he said, who's going to be with me? Is it going to be an angel? Is it going to be you yourself? What's going to be? And he said, furthermore, you have said, I have singled you out by name. If you have indeed, and you have indeed gained my favor. So, singled out by name is an interesting term. Um, in Hebrew, it's yadati b'shem.
No.
God says, I know you. I know your name. I know you through your name. And as you probably know, the verb ladat yodea is a verb used particularly in Genesis for a deeply intimate relationship. And so Adam knew his wife, for example, and they had children. So the idea that God knows Moses by name suggests a great deal of intimacy. He's been singled out, but more than that, um, there is a deep bond and connection. You said that, and now Moses says to God in verse 13, now if I have truly gained your favor, let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. So Moses is saying here, well, let me know your ways, drachecha, from the word derech. Actually, there's a kind of play on words here. Your ways could be the way we're supposed to go, the derech through the wilderness, the way. But here it seems to be, though it's not what's intended here. What are God's ways? It's really God's nature. So Moses is saying, you say that you know me by name. Well, I want to know you by name. I want to have a deep sense of your nature and that you will continue to be with me. And also, this people is your people. God had said about the people, you will lead the people, but God didn't say my people. And here God answers him, I will go in the lead and lighten your burden. So here God is saying, yes, I will continue myself to lead the people. And Moses says, if you're not going to do it, don't make us leave. For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor? Notice Moses is making a transition here between Moses gaining God's favor and the people. Uh, Only if you go with us will we know that this people is special to you, um, so that we may be distinguished, your people and I, from every people on the face of the earth. That is to say, what is distinctive about the Jewish people is their intimate relationship with God. Um, so now Moses goes a step. Moses says, I will do this. You've gained my favor, and I've signaled you out for name. And now Moses jumps ahead again. Moses is in some sense really pressing God. You say that you've known me intimately. Let me behold your presence. And in Hebrew, the word is kavod, God's kavod. Now, the kavod of God is, in some sense, the aura of God, a manifestation of God. Moses wants to have this intimate and direct relationship with God. And what God says to him is, I will make my goodness pass before you. I will proclaim before you the name Adonai. This is as close as I've known you by name and singled you out by name, and now I will let you hear my name and the grace that I will grant and the compassion that I will show. Right? These are my attributes, but you cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live. So, what God is saying to Moses here is, I will grant your request to the extent that it is possible for a human being. And so you will have a sense of my essence, but you will not ultimately experience that because no human being will be able to stand in that presence. So what does God say now? See, there is a place near me. He's up on Sinai. Station yourself on the rock, and as my kavod passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, shield you with my hand until I have passed. So God is saying, in some ways, um, I'll use my hand to protect you from my presence, the most direct part of me. Only that would be able to screen Moses. And I will take my hand away, and then you will see my back, but my face may not be seen. So Moses is being told that, and this is very anthropomorphic language, um, but it's a way of conveying what Moses is entitled to. So Moses will not see God directly. Moses will hear the proclamation of God's name, will experience God's nature verbally, but will not directly see God's presence. So, what does it mean to see God's back? What does it mean to see the wake of God? And I think that there's really a profound idea here, and that is how human beings can experience God. Um, we will not be granted that opportunity. We can't. There's too far from us. Um, the Kabbalists have this sense uh, that ultimately God is beyond, and perhaps it comes from here. God is known. God's essence is known as the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof is something that could never be experienced or known. Um, it is impossible. What the Kabbalists imagine is that there are a variety of levels through which human beings can experience God. From the simplest level, which is the most distant in some sense from God's essence, which is God's Shekhinah. Um, and that is something that we can experience all the way to this point where nothing can be known or experienced. That would be in this context, God's face. So coming back, what does it mean to see God's back? And I think there are two classic answers to this. One is that we can see in God's creation God's presence. We can see, since my wife is a ceramic artist and she makes pottery, I think about the idea that when you look at a handmade vessel, you sometimes can see the marks um, of the hands of the potter on the vessel. And I think from the biblical point of view, creation is shot through with God's presence, and we can experience God through nature. And the other thing, when we talk about God's back or the wake of God, is that we can see God through history. We can see what happened to the Jewish people. And we can sense perhaps there something of the presence of God. Now, that doesn't mean divine intervention. Um, I think the closest thing we could, at least for me, the closest thing we can think about is the very fact that we have survived as a people for thousands of years, and that our enemies, and sometimes those enemies have done devastating things to us, thinking about the Holocaust in particular. Nonetheless, God had made a promise that we would survive, and we have. And looking back over history and thinking about how unlikely that is as we faced persecution and death from one mighty empire after another, they are gone. We are still here. Okay, before we leave this, I'll come back. Questions or comments about this passage about Moses's. This is not quite leadership in some ways, but it is a desire on Moses's part as the leader of the people to have some sense of God's presence. Uh, yes, Myra.
Do you hear me? I think I unmuted.
I know you're not.
I'm not unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Oh, good. Okay. I don't know. It sort of bothers me when they make God to be like a man. You'll
Yes,
see my back. My hand is
yes,
shielding you.
yes,
This is a human being they're making him into.
yes. So the Torah uses anthropomorphic language all the time, right? To give you another example, and we know this from the Passover Seder, right? With an outstretched arm, I took, right? We God is compared in the book of Deuteronomy actually to a nursing mother, right? Who has suckled the people with honey from a rock, right? So um, Maimonides in particular is very concerned with this. Um,
I'm glad I'm in the same.
yeah, you and Maimonides, you're like this. So Maimonides, is at great pains to say that this is only figurative. The Guide for the Perplexed, which he wrote for his student to deal with difficult biblical issues, among other things, devotes a whole section to this. And what he says, Maimonides says, is there are metaphors, right? We can't really understand God. We can't visualize God. They're metaphors. Now, I have to say that there have been other elements of the Jewish tradition that really do see God in very anthropomorphic language. There's something called Shira Kavod, uh, Anim Zmirot. You might know it by that name, and it comes in our synagogue and in many traditional synagogues. Comes at the very end of the service, right? You open the ark, everyone is standing, and we sing this. I don't know. It's not quite a hymn. I don't know what to call it, but anyway one of the things it talks about, and it picks up, this is in the Talmud, in the first book in Brachot, it talks about God's tefillin. What could be more anthropomorphic than the idea of God wearing tefillin, right? And and uh, there's actually in Brachot, there's a question about what's inside God's tefillin. Right? I mean, can't have Shema Yisrael, right? And mi amcha Yisrael goyachad ba'aretz. Who is like your people, right? So we say Shema Yisrael, and God, as it were, has who is like your people, goyachad, one nation, right? God is echad, and we are echad. So that's extraordinarily anthropomorphic, and that certainly exists in the Jewish tradition. There are attempts to, there's a famous book, a mystical book, Shar Koma, which attempts to describe God's body and how big God is. And there are those who suggest, scholars who want to suggest that, in fact, ancient Israelites did perceive God as having a body. But the Jewish tradition has gone in a very different direction. And I think largely, though not completely, under the influence of Maimonides, and but even think about the Ten Commandments, right? No idolatry, no image of God. Now, it may be that just we are not permitted to make images of God, not that God doesn't have an image. But in general, there is this sense, and I think, for myself, as I think about this question, it's Maimonides. We can't conceive of God. All we can do is use language that points at something. So it says God's back, but what it really means is our evidence of God in the world, as much as we can see it, and so on. Good question.
Okay,
Anybody
thank
else?
you.
Sure. Anything else? Okay, we go back and I will share again. Okay, so now we have this story of Nadav and Avihu. A very famous story. This is right after the Mishkan, this portable sanctuary, has been created, and it's being consecrated. Aaron is now for the first time taking up his role as the high priest. Various sacrifices are being made. And now his two of his sons, Nadav and Avihu, each takes a fire pan, puts fire in it, and lays incense on it, right? So, and they offer before Adonai alien fire, which had not been enjoined upon them. Eish Zara, right? Alien fire, sometimes translated as strange fire. Um, so they take fire and put it in the pan to burn the incense and to create that smoke. But a fire comes from God and consumes them, and they died at the instance of Adonai. So, what did they do? Why did they do it? We know what they did. Why did they do it? It's really unclear. They seem to have done something that creates consequences for them. And that's as much as we can say. Uh, they did something unauthorized. And the thing about the sanctuary and the Mishkan is that everything has to be done exactly as the people are told to do it. There can be no variation. They are in God's presence. Just as the sanctuary itself, the Mishkan had to be created according to very, very exacting rules, rules which are revealed to Moses on Sinai. They're very specific: how long, how big, what materials, and so on. Only that way could God, as it were, be present there in the midst of the people. If there are variations, that's very dangerous. Why did they do it? It's hard to say. Maybe they were simply overcome by the moment. Maybe they wanted to be like their father, who was the one who had the right to do this. It's hard to say. It's hard to say even that God is punishing them, but rather that there's something about this place that demands that there be no variation. That the variation is inherently dangerous. So Moses then says to Aaron, "This is what Adonai meant by saying, 'Through those near to me, I will show myself holy and gain glory before all the people.'" Um, it's really unclear here, too, what Moses is doing. Um, is he attempting to console Aaron by saying, "Look, this is your sons have paid this price, uh, but it glorifies God. They are, you know, this what they are privileged. That look what they've done for God and for the whole people. They have made this sacrifice." And in reading this, I can't help but think about ancient peoples that did sacrifice someone when a temple was consecrated. Obviously, that is not what this text means, I think, but it is an odd resonance of it. Now, when Moses does that, Aaron is silent. It's the only place in the Torah where we're told somebody was silent. It's a really odd thing to say. Usually we hear and so spoke, and these are the words they said. And when they're not speaking, we don't hear. This idea of Aaron's silence, is he just struck dumb? Um, is he angry and not wish to express it? Is he just overwhelmed? We don't know. This is typical of the Torah because all we know is what people do, and we don't often know their motivations. The Jewish tradition takes from this ideas about how people are to mourn, um, that they need not speak. The tradition when you go to a house of mourning, pay a shiva call, that you are meant to sit in silence until a person starts to talk to you, that they are entitled to their silence. So Moses calls two sons of Uziel, Aaron's uncle, So they are Kohanim, and said to them, "Come forward, carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." And they come forward and carry them out of the camps by their tunics, as Moses had ordered. And now Moses says to Aaron and Eleazar and Itamar, "Do not bare your heads, do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strike the whole community." So they are in the sanctuary there. And what Moses is telling them is, in this place, at this time, you may not show signs of mourning. And interestingly, in the Talmud, the Torah reads into the Talmud reads into this some of the laws of mourning. Since it says, for example, do not rend your clothes, it must be that mourners should be tearing their clothes. That's the tradition of Kriya. These days, people, rather than tear their clothing, some people anyway, will tear a ribbon. But it comes from here, from this negative state. Since they can't, it must be that people do. And Moses is saying, anger will strike the people. You can't do this, but all of Israel will mourn them. And don't go outside the tent of meeting lest you die, right? You have to be here. God's anointing oil is on you. Not that God will kill them, but again, at this point, everything has to be done exactly. And they did as Moses had bid them. Okay, back to you. Questions, comments about the death of Aaron's sons for offering strange fire? Saul.
Yeah, first God says, you know, don't rend your clothes, etc. And then all of a sudden, Yivku et hasrefa asher saraf Adonai. Then they're mourning them, but they're mourning about the uh the fire.
Burning. Yeah, the burning.
Sounds a little contradictory.
No, it's the people. They can't. There. It's the people who are mourning. That's what Moses says. The people will mourn them. You have to stay here. You can't tear your clothes. You can't do this. They'll be carried out, and then the whole people will mourn them. So Moses is saying essentially they won't go unmourned. Right? And it's not clear. I mean, is Moses saying, once we leave, once it's all over, you can't mourn? I don't hear that here. At this moment, now, can they go and tear their clothing later? It's an interesting halachic question. Actually, the rabbis also. All of this is in a tractate called Moed Katan that I've been studying with one of my colleagues, so I'm very versed in this. And there's a whole discussion about when you tear. And and the consensus seems to be you should really tear when you hear the news. That's the appropriate moment. One of the rabbis says, if you don't do it, it's not really tearing. It's not, right? It should be an instinctive and immediate. This is later Talmudic law, right? But, are they going to mourn when they get out? What Moses is doing here, I think, is reassuring Aaron. They won't go unmourned. Um, More than that, I can't really say. Other questions about this or responses to it? Anything that strikes you before we move on? I think here Moses's leadership is really manifest in the sense, these are his nephews. Aaron is his brother. It's a hard thing to do, but he's really trying to protect the people in a fundamental. He's also trying to protect Aaron because he understands the consequences of all this. We tend to see one final thing. We tend to see these kinds of passages in the context of our own world. You drop a Sefer Torah, okay, you have to fast. or you have to give tzedakah or something like that, right? But the idea that you'll die, that you'll be consumed, that you know, this is very alien to our world. But the world of the Mishkan seems to be different. Okay, I'm going to go back, share my screen again. Continuing to move on, we're now in the book of Numbers. Um, and here is Moses is at a real low point. The people are weeping, every clan apart. They're at the entrance to the tent. God is angry. Moses is distressed. Moses says to God, "Why have you dealt ill with me? Why have I not enjoyed your favor?" Right? The passage that we looked at, talked about Moses after the golden calf. And God says, "You have my favor. You have it. Why have I not enjoyed your favor that you have laid the burden of this people on me?" Notice this people. Not your people, not my people. Did I produce this people? Did I engender them? Am I their parent? Right? That you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a caregiver carries an infant to the land that you promised on oath to my fathers. He said, this is too much. Right? That's what Moses has said. And you hear his bitterness here. He's overwhelmed by the people who are weeping and complaining. Um, and where am I? They want meat. This is the manna is not enough. They want meat. Where am I going to get meat for this people when they whine before me and say, "Give us meat to eat"? Right? I can't carry them by myself. It's too much for me. If you will deal with me this way, kill me. I beg. This is much stronger language than we saw earlier when Moses is saying, if you want to kill the people, then write me out of your book, right? Here, Moses is just utterly in despair. The only thing I can think of, which is like this, but very different, of course, is the book of Jonah, where Jonah pleads with God to end his life. There, the circumstances are very different. Here, Moses is utterly despairing, and God in- acquiesces here. He hears Moses, and he says, "Gather for me 70 of Israel's elders, of whom you have experience as elders, officers of the people. Bring them to the tent of meeting. Let them take their place there with you." So here Moses says, "I can't bear it." And God says, "I'm going to help you bear it. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will draw upon the spirit that is on you and put it on them, and they will share the burden of the people. You will not bear it alone." I think it's remarkable here that Moses gets through to God. Um, the phrase, "I will draw upon the spirit that is on you and put it on them," it's really unclear in some ways whether this would diminish Moses. Is it being shared? Moses will now have less, but they will all have it. It's one way of reading it. I think it's hard to read it that way. I think you have to assume, I assume that God's spirit is infinite. Take some away and it's still infinite. So at any rate, they will share the burden. You will not bear it alone. And say to the people, "Purify yourselves, for tomorrow you will eat meat, because you have kept whining before God. If only we had meat to eat. Indeed, we were better off in Egypt. Adonai will give you meat to eat. You will eat not 1 day or 2 or even 5 days, a month, until it comes out of your nostrils, becomes loathsome to you. For you have rejected Adonai, who is among you, by whining to God and saying, 'Why did we ever leave Egypt?'" And then, so this sounds good. And then Moses says, so there are two things here. First, Moses wants help. And then the other thing is, he says, the people who are with me are 600,000 foot soldiers. And you say, I will give them enough meat for a whole month? Could enough flocks and herds be slaughtered to sacrifice them? Could all the fish of the sea be gathered to suffice them? So, some of the commentaries look at this and they talk about flocks and herds, and they say actually the people had flocks and herds, and so they really could have meat. And all of this is a pretext for complaining about Moses. I think that's unlikely because obviously they don't have the fish of the sea with them. And so what Moses is saying, how is this possible for 600,000 people? And God says, is there a limit to Adonai's power? You will see whether what I have said happens to you or not. And Moses goes out and reports the words, and he does what God said. He gathers 70 of the people's elders and stations them around the tent. Then, after coming down in a cloud and speaking to him, Adonai drew the spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 participating elders. When the spirit rested upon them, they spoke in ecstasy, right? But did not continue. I think that this kind of passage, if you think about fundamentalist Christians, some of whom speak in tongues, they go into this trance and they say that God is filling them, and this I think is the speaking in ecstasy, at least how they understand it. But it didn't continue. In other words, it came upon them and they did it, and then it stopped. So that's important for what is going to follow. I do want to say that later on, we have the story of Saul in the book of Samuel. And one of the things about Saul is that at one point he joins a band of prophets. These are a different kind of prophets than the prophets that we ordinarily think of. Jeremiah, Isaiah, these are people who God has spoken to and said, you speak in my name. And they say, thus says the Lord. The prophets, the band of prophets that Saul joins, are people who seem to do this. They speak in ecstasy. They roll around on the ground. They're having a kind of mystical experience. And that seems to be the sense of these people. And also the idea that this is the spirit that God took from Moses, I think is important for what we see in a second. We'll do that now. Two of the participants, one named Eldad and Medad, had remained in the camp. So why did they stay back? Why weren't they up there with the other 68? And Rashi here says they didn't think they were worthy. This was their humility. At any rate, the Spirit rested upon them. They were among those who were recorded, but they had not gone into the tent. They spoke in ecstasy in the camp. This seems to come to them directly. In other words, it's not the Spirit. This seems like spirit that comes directly from God, as opposed to the elders, the 68 other elders who are up there, and Moses' spirit is spread over them. Because what happens? They speak in ecstasy in the camp, but it doesn't say they stopped. It's not like the others. And an assistant runs to Moses and he says, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. And this is the prophet as Saul was, obviously. And Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' attendant. He was always Moses' right-hand man. Ultimately, of course, as you know, takes over as the next leader. And he speaks to Moses and he says, restrain them. And Moses says, are you upset on my account? would all that God's people were prophets and the divine spirit was upon them. And he re-enters the camp. Here, I think this is an extraordinary sense of Moses's humility and his leadership here. He's not unhappy. He's not threatened by this. It isn't under his control. And this is in some sense what he wants. He wants all the people to have this kind of experience that he has. But of course, that is not meant to be. Okay. Any comments on this passage? Anything at all about Eldad and Medad and Moses' response to them? Okay. So there's something very nice about seeing all these stories one after another, I have to say. Um, we lose the context, but it's in some ways it builds for me, it builds a certain picture, which I think is valuable. Okay, well, we're going to do one more. Yeah, so
I wanted to say one thing. This relates to the Hebrew. I think Joshua said, "Shut them in, yikalem." That's where the word kela means prison in the modern Hebrew.
Yeah,
there.
that's true. That's true. I never made that connection. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other comments? Anything? Okay, good. Back to the text. Okay, so yeah, okay. So here we come to again, Moses is defending the people. And here this is when after the incident of the scouts, remember that Moses sends 12 scouts into the land. They think that they're about to enter it. 10 of them come back and they say, yes, it's a beautiful land, but we'll never conquer it. There are giants there. We felt like we were grasshoppers comparison to them. Everybody gets extremely discouraged. They rebel again. And here God says to Moses, this is enough, right? Again and again and again. How long will they have no faith in me despite all the signs? I will strike them with pestilence and disown them and make of you a nation far more numerous. We've seen this before. And Moses says, when the Egyptians from whose midst you brought this people in hear the news, they will tell it to the inhabitants of that land. So the Egyptians will hear this, and they have heard that you are in the midst of this people, that you appear in plain sight when your cloud rests upon them. You go before them in a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. If you slay this people wholesale, the nations who have heard of your fame will say, it must be because God was powerless to bring the people to the land that God had promised, that God slaughtered them. So this is a very clever argument. This is not just what will people say. This is one of the main purposes of the Exodus, as you recall, was to demonstrate God's power. That God is the God. And here he said, you're undermining your own role. You can't do this. And there he says, therefore I pray, let God's forbearance be great, as you have declared, saying, Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum v'Chanun. Right? I didn't read this passage before. It is revealed to Moses right before that whole scene where, God says, you can't see my face, you'll see my back and all of that. But God had declared his nature, his drachecha. He says, I am slow to anger and abiding in chesed, and I am forgiving iniquity, right? He says, so you, here he says, pardon the iniquity of this people in your great kindness as you have forgiven this people before. So here, I mean, Moses first makes the claim that it will be all for naught in terms of this these acts and these wonders that you did to create your reputation. And notice that's what God said above. He said, despite the signs that I performed in their midst. And Moses is turning it back to him, to God, and saying, no, no, uh, those will be for naught, for you, not for them. They'll be for naught because it'll all collapse and people will think you're powerless. And then Moses uses God's expressed nature against God. Now, I'm leaving apart the second part of this, visiting the iniquity of parents upon children, the third or fourth generations, which I don't even want to engage. It's complex, but when we recite this, and we recite it again and again on the high holidays, we we go to remitting punishment. We talk about God forgiving iniquity, transgression, and then we stop. And Moses here has to quote the whole thing, but he is saying, in a sense, to God, first of all, it'll be counterproductive. And second of all, God, this is not who you are. You've told me who you are. You've shown me who you are. This is unbecoming to you. It reminds me a little bit of Moses, of Abraham at Sodom and Gomorrah, who says when God's going to destroy the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Moses says, far be it from you to destroy the innocent along with the guilty. This is not who you are. And here Moses is saying something similar. So here again, in terms of Moses's leadership, his ability to plead in a very lawyerly way, to plead this case for the people against before God, extremely skilled way that he does it, and he is largely successful. They will, of course, the generation will die in the wilderness, but their children will come to the promised land. All right. So we are just about out of time. Um, Anything else? I don't want to go any further because we won't have time to do it. Any comments about any of this? Oh, sure.
In Kitisa, God reveals the attributes, and here in Shalach Lecha, Moshe reveals them.
Yes.
So he's taking
Yes.
it from God.
Yeah. And that's really my point, that once God reveals them, Moses can throw them up, as it were, in God's face. That this is like, in some ways, we saw this earlier in a different way, when God says, wait a minute, you made a covenant. You can't act. That's where God said, I'll wipe them out and do it the first time. I'll wipe them out and go through with you. And Moses says, oh no, you have limited yourself, right? So here too, Moses was making kind of a legalistic claim. We have a deal, you can't abrogate the deal. But here, God also is using, what God has revealed to demonstrate to God, to limit God, essentially saying, you have limited yourself or your nature. Yes, you can do everything, but it would be out of character for you to do it. Good. Myra.
What bothers me about this whole thing is it makes God into a person, a human being with flaws, makes mistakes, does, and then you have to talk him out of it. And that just gets to me.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, first of all, you're a Maimonidean. He doesn't like it either. So you're in really good company. But I have to say that God, in the Greek idea, and Moses was influenced by Maimonides, influenced by Aristotle, right? The Greek idea was Aristotelian idea, was the unmoved mover, right? The creator who is very abstract, right? But that's not the biblical God. The biblical God is I'm not saying a person, but a personality. And we see this again and again and again. God gets angry. God is slow to anger. God is forgiving. God gets angry. God is intertwined. You shall have no other gods before me, right? Because I am a zealous God or a jealous God, right? God has feelings, and those feelings can be hurt. Now, I understand this is not the way we think of God. We do in some ways, right? We can think of God being disappointed in us. I think that that's fairly common. But the biblical God, and for the rabbis too, God has personality, views. God finds even the idea of giving laws, right? Giving laws means certain things are unacceptable to God, right? That in itself is, in some ways, if you think about it, not all that abstract. Other comments? Sandy.
So, Rabbi, you often talk about the attributes of God that we emulate, as far as, first in the Garden of Eden, God clothes
Yes.
Adam and Eve, visits the sick, buries the dead. And I heard a program once about the 13 attributes, because we're made in God's image. That's what we should emulate, slow to anger,
Right.
passion, and everything. So I thought that was very beautiful.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned this, because I've been thinking a lot about it for two reasons. I'm speaking in synagogue on the 15th, which is actually my birthday. And so the parsha there is Chayesara, which is when Moses sends his servant to find a wife for Isaac, and he sets up a test. And it's clear that the test is to see if what the character of this woman will be, whether it's about hospitality, but more broadly, it's about chesed. It's about loving kindness and how far someone will go to help another person. And I think that that quality of chesed is what we're talking about when we say that God clothes the naked, or visits the sick or buries the dead, right? That sense, which actually, so I've been reading a book of Musar, which is a Jewish ethical tradition. It's actually a wonderful book, and it goes through different attributes that a person should cultivate. And one of them is chesed. So anyway, I'm going to speak about chesed in my sermon, I think. I'm not quite there, but I think so. Good. I'm glad you mentioned it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, then in Pirkei Avot, one of the earlier Mishnayot talks about the world being built on loving kindness.
Yes. Yeah. Same thing. Okay. So I hope to see you all next week. Just a reminder, so we're going to meet next week. We're going to meet the week after, and then we'll be off for 2 weeks, the week of Thanksgiving, and the week after that, as I'll be out of town. I hope to see you next week. In the meantime, have a great week.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.